number of challenges for the sports nutrition sector, and the main one is that general food legislation does not always recognize the specific nutritional needs of sports people. An example of that is the Nutrition and Health Claim Regulation. This regulation takes into account sports people as a target group, but when health claims are being assessed, the needs of sports people are not always taken into account. And examples of that are sodium or glucose claims that have been rejected because they were contradicting general public health advice, whilst they could have been restricted to the sports group population. Nutrition claims that the Commission is not really willing to open a dialogue on additional nutrition claims. Labeling is an issue as well, because labeling regulation provides for the labeling of salt as opposed to sodium. There is an issue with the definition of protein in that regulation, but also with how protein is labeled on products. And yes, to give you another example, there is the fortification regulation, which provides for minimum amounts of vitamins and minerals, whilst there are products on the market like electrolyte solutions, which provides levels of vitamins and minerals that are lower than what is in that regulation, because those levels are needed just to replace the electrolyte lost in sweat. The European Commission has clearly stated that some elements of specificity of the sports nutrition market have to be taken into account when applying and implementing the horizontal rules, the general food legislation. But as always with these things, unless there is a strong push from the industry to do some things, nothing is being done. So it's really important that the industry engages and works into ensuring that the specific needs of sports people are taken into account within the general food legislation framework. So a year after the start of the Brexit negotiations, the food and nutrition sector is still in a limbo, and this is because the UK government has still failed to provide some reassurance on its future negotiation position or its long-term vision for the food and nutrition sector. What we know is that the UK will leave the EU on the 30th of March 2019, that a transition period of about 2 years will then follow, and that the future relationship will be one where the UK regains controls of its policies, regulation, of its borders and courts. It's very unlikely that the UK government will be able to get to a point where sufficient clarity will be provided by 30th of March next year. So there are huge challenges for businesses, and in particular for those businesses that are not engaging actively with this process and planning for it. The European Commission has issued a notice trying to advise food businesses on what sort of implication they may be faced with, and there is a whole plethora of issues, starting with labeling, origin labeling, import controls, requirements, to name just a few. So there is really one advice to give to businesses. Businesses need to start planning for this process, looking at the possible scenarios following Brexit, in particular as scenarios where no deal is reached with the EU. They need also to work through trade associations, especially European-wide trade associations, for when the UK leaves the EU. But they also need to monitor potential regulatory divergence over time. Regulatory divergence may bring some benefit in the future, so it's important to build the relationship with the stakeholders as soon as possible.